Hi, everybody. Chris Bove here again with the Wisdom Through Bitcoin podcast. I have a very special guest on the show today, Surfer Jim. He goes by on Twitter. He's a very experienced Bitcoiner that's been on many podcasts you've probably heard of in the past or heard his shows on in the past. I'm very excited to have him on the show and to get his perspective. He's a little bit later in life, and for that has a little bit more, as I mentioned, perspective on Bitcoin and how it's a good asset to have in anybody's portfolio. So whether you're young or old, you should give it a look. And so we're going to have a great conversation. Both of us enjoy talking about Bitcoin a lot. And with that, I'd like to introduce Surfer Jim and start him off with his Bitcoin orange pill story and a little bit of background about himself and why he loves this asset.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me on. All right. So I heard about Bitcoin in 2015. So like most people, you need a couple touches. I had three. First one was from a young guy who described it as some kind of internet money, and I thought it had to do with gaming, and I wasn't a gamer. So I dismissed it. Maybe a year later, I saw a Netflix special, and I saw the title Bitcoin. I was curious. It was a type of documentary. I don't remember the name of it. And the emphasis was on, it was early still. The documentary described the early days of Bitcoin, and it described Mt. Gox, it described mining. It showed people with mining rigs in their living rooms and their wives and girlfriends freaking out with the noise and the heat. And I'm like, yeah, I guess that thing's still not for me. So I didn't grasp it at all those two times. I didn't really consider what it was beyond some tech thing that was, being an older guy, it looked like something for a younger generation of people to explore, and nothing that would bring me necessarily any value specifically. And then I happened to run across a TED talk. So maybe another year later, I was probably late 16, early 17. I'm walking the dog. I'm listening to YouTube. I ended up getting one of those unlimited data plans. So I started streaming videos, and I was listening to old music from when I was growing up, and I was just exploring YouTube, and I saw this thing called a TED Talk, and I saw the title Bitcoin in it, and I went, oh, there's that Bitcoin thing again. Wonder what that's about. And it was a woman talking about Bitcoin, and I went back and watched it years later, and I don't think she really actually grasped Bitcoin, but she said something that caught my attention, which was, you can trust the Bitcoin protocol without trusting any of the people who are involved in it. And I just went, whoa, that's a weird statement. How can you trust how it works, but the people who run it, you don't have to trust them? How is that even possible? And boy, that was a wake up moment for me, because I spent over 30 years building up a business that runs totally on trust. All my customers are never home when I work on their houses, because I work on summer homes where the people are only there for a few months in the summer, and I do a lot of the work in the winter, and they have to trust me. And I built up a reputation over the years. I have a lot of customers that keep hiring me because I always come through. So I recognize the concept of trust and what it means to having a successful business. And I had to know more about it at that point. I needed to know, how could she make a statement like that? And so as a builder, I understand how things work, inside the walls and under the floor and, under the hood, so to speak. And I've spent my life kind of taking things apart and trying to understand the physics or the logic behind whatever it was that piqued my curiosity. So I spent a lot of time as a kid taking stuff apart, like my clock radio or my phonograph when I was a little kid, whatever it was, because I wanted to see inside. So I kind of looked at Bitcoin the same way. I says, I got to figure out what this thing is. What are they talking about? Why does this lady say I can trust the protocol? What is even the protocol? Like, I didn't know anything about it. I'm not a computer nerd. I've learned a lot about how to operate a computer and a lot of things about computers in general. But again, being an older guy, a lot of this stuff, I was already, too old to become a computer programmer, already in a career, all these things that a younger generation of kids dove into computers at many different levels, and they're, worldwide experts, and they're half my age, So I had to do my best, and I had nobody to talk to either. All I could do is scour the internet for other information about Bitcoin. And I think I got very lucky, because it's either that or I was discerning enough to pick out the signal through the noise. But I did find some people that seemed like they were talking, like they knew what they were talking about. So early on, guys like Jimmy Song, Giacomo Zucco, Tone Vase. This would be in early 2017. There was a YouTube channel called the World Crypto Network. A guy named Thomas Hunt used to host a lot of people on there. Another guy, Ansel Lindner, another guy named Vortex. So a whole bunch of these guys that were much earlier in Bitcoin than I was, 2 to 4 years to even more earlier than me, seemed to know what they were talking about. I ended up connecting with New Yorkers. I'm in Long Island, New York, and in New York City, there's a lot more Bitcoiners, and they had meetups going, and I was able to connect with some people there. So I met Pierre Richard and Marty Bent, and Matt Odell, and all. Right now, I go to BitDevs in New York. I sit there with core developers like Peter Woola or Andrew Chow. They're always there, and so these guys are like the smartest guys in Bitcoin. And I was fortunate enough to listen to them, pay attention, and through repetition, months and months of listening to a lot of podcasts and whatever I could get my hands on reading information, I was able to understand what was going on. That's really what it did for me. I started to be able to see what was happening with this protocol, what its limitations, what its features were, why people were giving it the qualities they said it had, this decentralized quality, and the idea that you can own a digital scarce asset, or all these different descriptions that were being used. It took me a while, but once it clicked, once I understood what it was, how it was operating, and how you could own a digital file and no one could take it away and only you could move it around, it became super fascinating. And then in my research, you can't help but be touched by other related fields around Bitcoin when you're listening to people get interviewed. So I heard about Austrian economics, never heard of the thing before. I went through school, I did a couple of years of college. No one ever said what that was. Boy, that was a rabbit hole in itself, because I kept hearing people discuss the economics of Bitcoin and this concept of Austrian economics. I had to find out what that was. And then, I mentioned Pierre Richard. He put out a tweet. Oh, so one of the things that I had to do as an old guy, again, I'm listening to a podcast and someone says, you want to learn about Bitcoin, you got to get on Twitter. And I just went, what? I don't want to get on Twitter. What is that? Isn't that for kids? Because again, like I see a little blue bird and I don't know. I think it's all just kids stuff. I'm this older guy. I'm going to be 62 next month. So I didn't want to get on Twitter. I was never on social media. I never did Facebook, none of that stuff. So I get on Twitter. And so I start following people. Pierre's one of these people. He puts out a tweet. If you want to come to a steak dinner in New York City with me and Saifedean, reply to this tweet. And it was like 4 minutes old. I looked at it. I'm like, holy crap, I got to get in this thing. Because I just wanted to meet him and Saifedean. Saifedean had already written his book, The Bitcoin Standard. I think I had already read it. And I thought, this is great. I love steak. Now I'm over at the steak dinner with these two guys and like 10 other people getting orange pilled about carnivore diets. So there's another rabbit hole I went down thanks to Bitcoin. So all this stuff happened to me since 2017. I became an anarcho-capitalist, whatever you want to call it. Definitely, I'm a libertarian. I've been to Pork Fest in New Hampshire 2 summers in a row now, which is a big on freedom festival thing. Really cool. Yeah, that's my story. That's how I found Bitcoin, and then it led to so many other things. I didn't mean to keep going for so long, but I just kept thinking of things to add. So
no, man, that's incredible. That's kind of like you've mentioned the who's who in Bitcoin, and you got to rub shoulders with almost all of them. I mean, I think most of the people in the Bitcoin space would just dream of being able to talk to some of these people in a one-to-one conversations that it seems like you had almost regular access to in the beginning.
Yeah, well,
an incredible resource to really bounce ideas off of, and anything that you thought might have been kind of a challenge that you were having with taking Bitcoin seriously. You had like the right people in front of you to be able to ask those questions to.
You got to put yourself out there. So I decided to go to conferences. Again, I started to meet these people. An odd series of events after having the steak dinner with Pierre and Saifedean. A couple other people that were at that dinner, I also met them as well. And they, Saifedean had to come back a week later for a debate in New York City at the Soho Forum. These other 2 people were going to host him at their house in Rockaway by the ocean for a barbecue. And they said, hey, you want to join? I'm like, why not? So I brought some surfboards and I was out there trying to help Saifedean learn to surf. Of all things, how did I find myself in that position? So and then I saw him many other times since then. And so now when I see him, it's like, hey, what's up, dude? And we know each other. And it's just what I have found, like most people in the world, most people are regular people, unless they're superstars and they got a big ego. Most people are pretty reasonable and humble. And if you don't bug them, they'll talk to you, So you go to a conference. I only like Bitcoin conferences, and I go to a bunch of them, and the people are really cordial and they're very accessible. And I've met a lot of people. I recently met Michael Saylor at a private party after the Pacific Bitcoin conference in LA. And it was a private party. So everybody's very cordial to everybody, and everybody gives him his space. And I had a couple minutes to talk to him, and he was very nice to me. And he happened to know who I was in advance because he had heard about me. He was already following me on Twitter, which I was a little bit shocked when that happened. But I inadvertently ended up with a little bit of a reputation in this space, a lot of it because of my shit posting on Twitter. I hope I could say that. Sorry.
Oh yeah, say whatever you want to say.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I ended up, I got a big mouth, and yeah, I think people like my heavy New York accent. I don't know what it is. I think part of it has to be with my I don't give a shit attitude, because I'm older now and I really just don't give a shit about too much stuff anymore. I don't have to care about a lot of the things that you have to care about when you're younger and you're building a life and building a career and all these other things. I've done all that stuff, and I feel pretty comfortable with who I am and what I've done and where I'm going. And so I just don't give a shit about a lot of stuff. There's way too many bad rules in the world, so I have no problem breaking a lot of them. I don't care.
Yeah.
I just don't give a shit.
To take a step back a little bit from that story, how long after you first started hearing about Bitcoin and researching it did you finally go ahead and pull the trigger and start accumulating?
Oh, 6 months. I watched the price go triple. I watched the price triple as I was trying to learn about it. I just couldn't do it. It was a Ponzi. I kept hearing all the FUD, and I kept hearing all the negative news and the black market, drug money, money laundering, stupid stuff. And I was a statist. I used to vote. I think that's the silliest thing you could do now, because it doesn't do anything. These people do whatever they want. Voting for whoever I don't know, it doesn't change anything. In my life, I haven't seen anything change. It only got worse, which shocks me, because as a kid growing up, I thought the world would keep getting better. As more knowledge came into the world, as more people learned the golden rule about treating people nice and don't litter, and it didn't change. People are still just as mean and dirty as ever. And I just am shocked. And I now know why. The world is broken. Price signals are a language that people need that we all need it in order to function properly, and they're broken all over the world because the monetary systems are corrupted. And you don't see that. You don't see that until you understand. You have to learn about money. So that was a whole nother rabbit hole. I had to learn about the history of money.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that. So since
Sure.
you've been in Bitcoin for the last 7 years now, I know you must have done a lot of research on monetary policy and central banking and all that other kind of stuff, especially with the people in the Bitcoin space that you've talked to. In the very beginning, was there anything about the current money system that you felt let you down? Like, were you actively searching for something else up to take the place of money in your own life? Or
Nope,
when did you realize that the money had failed you?
after I learned what Bitcoin was. Honestly, I didn't understand how money worked. I didn't understand how the Fed operated. I had this intuition. I knew they controlled the money. The government controlled the money. I knew the concept that it wasn't backed by gold anymore. But like everybody else, and when I got money, everybody always took it. I could always exchange it for things. So to me, it always had value. I didn't really understand why, but it was, I have to say, there was a weird moment in time when I actually saw gasoline prices go down. And I thought, why is that? It seems to me everything always goes up. My whole life, the price of everything has basically just kept going up. And I just accepted that as a normal. I didn't understand inflation as an increase in the money supply. I thought of it as each person slowly asking for a raise. And little by little, everybody has to keep slowly jacking up their prices around in a circle all through the economy. Little by little, every year, everybody wants just a little more money so they can get a little. That was my concept of inflation. It was just everybody feeding off everybody else. And once I understood Bitcoin, limited supply, uncontrollable, I started to hear about the Cantillon effect, or Cantillon, however you say that. That's said a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I don't know how to say it properly either.
I think in French, I think it's Cantillon, but whatever. we know what it's, you and I know what it is. And for anybody who doesn't Google it, yeah, basically, when people can control money, they can create units of money without doing any work. The first people that get used to that money get it before it's in what we would call its inflated state. That is, before the market recognizes there's extra money out there. And then as it gets dispersed out slowly over time, there's just more units. Everybody has more units. So everybody can pay more. And just little by little, the prices keep going up because there's more units to buy a limited number of goods. Essentially, it's a supply and demand dynamic that they don't teach you in school. They don't want us to know this stuff. That's part of the problem. So yeah, I didn't get it. I didn't know I needed to replace my money. I really didn't. I didn't understand the concept of fiat money. Never even heard the term other than an automobile when I was growing up,
So in 2015, when or 2016, maybe when you first started buying it and you started noticing.
Oh, wait, hold on. Let me just correct. I just want to correct the record. I heard about Bitcoin in 15. I heard about it again in 16. Still didn't buy any. It wasn't until 17 when I bought some around mid 17 or first half of 17. I watched the price in early 7. I started paying attention end of 16, started learning, started watching the price early 17. And for months I kept watching it. And I was watching traders online and trying to learn. I thought I had to trade Bitcoin. I didn't get hodling. I was still learning everything. And I watched it go from 1,000 to 3,000. And I thought, I can't believe how much money this costs now. I could have bought one of these things for $1,000. Now it's going to cost me triple. And I couldn't even pull the trigger because I kept watching the price go up before I understood it. Then I saw it come back down to, I forget where, under 3,000. It was in the twos somewhere. And I finally was grasping it. And I said, I got to pull the trigger. And I didn't even buy a whole Bitcoin. I didn't even buy a half a Bitcoin. I bought a few $100s worth. I got a Coinbase account. All there was up there was Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin. That was the only 3 I could have even bought, even if I wanted to. Being in New York, very limited on how you can acquire Bitcoin. They make it very hard for anybody to do business in New York. Thank you to the politicians for being shitheads and making life harder for adults. It's insane. I can't use Unchained Capital. I can't use Strike because they make it hard for those businesses to work here. So they just choose not to. So anyway, that's how I did it. So it wasn't until 2017. I watched the price come down under 3,000 and thought, I got to try and get some of this. And it's never been lower. I'm really glad I made that first purchase. And all the ups and downs, all those years, the price I first paid, it's still never been lower. So I'm glad I did it.
When you were going through that process and you were going to these meetups and you were learning from the Bitcoiners, the OG Bitcoiners, as they're called, and then you were going out into your own personal life and you must have been having conversations with the people around you, whether it be your wife, your kids, or your friends, or brothers, sisters, whatever. What kind of response were they giving you, and what kind of negativity that you talked to them about kind of leached into your own sort of psyche and made it more difficult in the beginning for you to begin really understanding it and really accumulating in higher numbers? Because when I first started, I asked that kind of from a point of perspective of experience too, because I, like you, got started in mid 2017. And when I first started, it was because Coinbase was like, if you buy $100 in Bitcoin, we'll give you $10 in Bitcoin if you hold it for a week. So I held it for a week, and then I was like, okay, 10% return on $100, whatever. And it was like $1,800, and then it went to $2,000, and then it went to $2,300, and I was like, shoot, I need to start buying more of this stuff, because once I got my foot wet, I started doing much of the research that you started doing, and then I was like, oh my gosh, maybe this is a real asset. This is money for the people.
All right. So you started out in the beginning of that. What was the original question? It was,
so the original question is as you were getting involved in the Bitcoin community and you were going to meetups and learning from how did the other people you were talking to that weren't in Bitcoin affect your perspective and your thought process on the asset?
Okay. Thank you. Because I have something very specific to say about this. My understanding was so deep at this point, no one could dissuade me away from Bitcoin. It was impossible. Once I understood it, I realized they had no idea what they were talking about. And so because I was watching the price in 2017 just go up, I thought, of course, I was a genius. And everybody around me, I'm like, you got to get this thing. It's going to $1 million. Holy crap. And of course, as it kept going up, I kept thinking, oh, I can't believe I missed this thing. All these years it's been around and I didn't see it. And now it's $20,000 by the end of 2017. And I'm like, how the hell am I ever going to get a couple of these things, let alone one? I don't even know if I owned a whole Bitcoin at that point. And I was just going, holy crap, this is crazy, man. So as it was going back down, I was already convinced. All right, so let me just step back a second. So anybody older or anybody that's not a computer nerd or a finance guy, and you learn about Bitcoin, and you want to tell your friends and family, be aware they're immediately not going to believe you because you are outside of your lane. As a builder, nobody wants to take financial advice from me, but they'll listen all day long about how to put an extension on their house because they figure I might know what I'm talking about. So I had learned that lesson many years earlier. So when people thought I was crazy, didn't want to listen, didn't want to buy any, I'd see my friends for months, weeks later. Hey, did you get it? I don't know. I don't have time. I couldn't convince anybody. I literally had zero luck convincing anybody to own Bitcoin. I gave it to some people, friends, family that lost the keys, whatever. I learned some stupid lessons there. But when if they don't see you as an expert in the field, they're just not going to listen. They have to have a reason to want to hear it. And if you can't point them in a direction that makes them curious, they're not going to listen. And I had to deal with that. But when they told me I was crazy, when they pushed back, none of their negative comments affected me because I knew how to come back to them, although they couldn't always grasp my answers, when I would start talking about the Fed and money printing, because now you got to start teaching them about the history of money and all these different things. And it's all too much for them. It's like a fire hose. And so it just becomes a difficult conversation because they can't even grasp what you're at when they say, perfect FUD question is, Bitcoin uses a lot of electricity. Okay, right. So let's compare to what? You can go down a million roads compared to Christmas lights, compared to your hair dryer, your clothes dryer. Like what is acceptable to waste money on or spend money on in the form of energy to secure a monetary network for the world? Is that a reasonable use of energy? How about the fact that Bitcoin uses a lot of green and wasted energy and it makes the grids more stable? People don't know this stuff. You try to explain that to them, they're like, what are you talking about? Makes the grid. Then you got to explain how every day electrical power generation companies throw electricity into the ground and waste it every second of every day because they have to have more power than what is needed for every second. Otherwise, you get a brownout or a blackout. As soon as too many people flip a switch, the excess power is not there. They got to ramp up the generators. So they're always throwing away electricity. Bitcoin miners can sit there right next to every electrical generation plant on the planet and rev up and down with the usage, and the electrical grid gets more stable. The generators run more stable. The municipality can make more money and sell every bit of electricity instead of wasting any of it. This makes the planet much more efficient, much better. Makes the use of fossil fuels for energy more efficient. So right there, you're helping the planet. Nobody knows this stuff. So look at how long I took just to explain that one thing. And then they hear it from me and they go, you don't know what you're talking about. You just build houses. What do you know? So like, it's okay, whatever, dude. A couple years later, enough people have said to me, "Man, I should have listened." And then you keep going. You go, well, it's not late. You're not late, dude. And they still, oh, but I got the money. $5 a day. I get free Satoshis every day from multiple sources. I just told somebody yesterday, I go, you can get this stuff for free. They were giving away full Bitcoins in 2010. You could have got 5 Bitcoins for free every day. If you'd known what you were getting, man, I would have just been stacking free Bitcoins. How many could you have gotten? It's amazing.
Yeah, and it's amazing how many people lost those Bitcoins, right? Because there's that perception out there that there's no value in free. So if people don't have to pay for it, they really don't have any value in it. And there's something like 3.5 million Bitcoins that have been lost forever because people were doing it as a novelty early on and they didn't keep proper track of their keys and whatnot, and threw away their hard drives and all sorts of crazy stuff, which at the end of the day is actually better for the community because it creates even more scarcity. So even though there's 21 million Bitcoin out there, there's really only about 17.5 billion million Bitcoin that are available to actually be purchased if somebody wants to put them on the open market for sale.
Yep. And I actually used that in a calculation. I wrote an article, it was in Citadel 21 magazine, comparing the limited supply of real estate to the limited supply of Bitcoin. And in those calculations, I'm just looking on another computer screen for, I want to make a point about giving things away and how people don't value stuff. So the limited supply of Bitcoin, you do have to consider what might have been lost or what most people consider is lost or never going to move again. And I know for a fact, some people I gave Bitcoin to lost the private key. So those are actually also lost. And we have no idea how many people had that for little tiny amounts. So I took 21 million and I subtracted a couple million out of that from my calculation. And then when I was doing the calculation on land, I subtracted out like mountains and swamps and unusable land and taking statistics off the internet. The point of the article was to figure out, well, if you split up all the land and gave the same amount to every person, how much would you get? It's a little under 2 acres of the usable land on the planet. And then if you split up all the Bitcoin, how much would you get? It's about 231,000 sats. And at the time in 2019, when I wrote that article, that cost you I called it your fair share of the entire Bitcoin network, cost like $20. And right now for the same amount, it costs like $50 to get your fair share, right? Like an equal amount of all the sats that are out there, which is nothing. You can get that much every week, every couple, whatever. Like it's just not a lot. So people don't realize that in a limited network like this, the amount of units you own is what matters, and not necessarily what you pay for them now. It's what they're going to be worth and their ability to purchase goods and services in the future. So just as an example, I'm divorced now, many people know. And so my ex-wife, I gave her $250 worth of Bitcoin in 2017. And it is now worth, I keep it on a spreadsheet so I can rub it in her face. You know what that's worth, right? It's worth currently 1,100, but when the price was 69,000, it was worth a lot more. And yeah, unfortunately, some people didn't want to see it, and she blames it on me. I don't really talk to her anymore, but her last thing was like, "Ooh, you should have written down." And the whole thing was, I knew so much about it. I was like teaching her autonomous control of your own money. I literally, even as her husband at the time, didn't know her private key, so I couldn't steal her freaking money. I was trying to teach her what's going on here. She didn't get it. She didn't get any of it. And of course, coming from me, it's like, what do I know?
I'm actually wearing a shirt right now. I don't know if you can read it, but it's a hashtag every Satoshi matters.
They do. So everyone, dude. Like I said, I get them for free every day. I have the Fold card. Whenever I buy stuff, I get free Satoshis, hundreds of thousands in a day, sometimes, depending on what I'm buying and what kind of rewards I get. And then there's Lolly has an app where you can just push a button and get free sats every day as well. And I think a sats as dollars, even though it's a long way off before they're worth the equivalent of $1 today. But I think there's a possibility, high possibility, that if Bitcoin does remain the world's monetary system in a couple generations, when the old folks my age are all long gone and kids just being born today are my age, let's say 50 years from now, 60, 100 years from now, a single Bitcoin could be worth 100 million. And very few people, if any, have a single Bitcoin anymore, because over generations, it'll keep getting dispersed. Whatever I leave to my heirs might make them super wealthy, but they'll live off some of it and they'll leave a little less. And, at some point, somebody with a few thousand Satoshis could be like, having a few $1,000s today. Right now, you can get a $1 worth of Satoshis is like more than 5,000 Satoshis for $1. So if you think of a Satoshi like $1 and 3-4 generations from now, every Satoshi matters. That was my point. Your shirt says it all. Every single one matters. You have no idea what they might be worth to somebody that's down your lineage, that you can bless them by having hodled them now.
Yeah, and you had mentioned that you talked to Michael Saylor a couple months ago at the Pacific Bitcoin conference. And one of his big things is Bitcoin is less of like a commodity. Excuse me, it's more of like a commodity and less like a currency. So in the beginning days of Bitcoin, it was thought of it was going to be this digital realm transactional currency that people could use that was outside of a government control. Pure internet money. But now, as it's the volatility of it has created this game theory of accumulation, where people don't want to use it as a currency. They want to use it as a commodity. They want to use it as a store of wealth, as this 21 million set supply stays constant, demand goes up, price go up technology, the NGU technology that we talk about in Bitcoin. And it's a lot during the bear or the bull markets of Bitcoin. It's a lot of the thing that gets people involved in Bitcoin is that number go up technology, because everybody wants, in their own mind, when you come from fiat and you're looking for ways to create a better life for yourself, you're only thinking in fiat terms. So you're thinking, okay, this asset is going up in fiat terms, accelerated faster than any other asset on the face of the planet. I got to get involved in this because in my mind, it's more fiat for me and I'll be able to do more things with it. But then as it reverses and we go down into a bear market, all of a sudden, all those people, all that community that was created from this bull market, all the conversations, all the people, all your friends that gave you all the FUD about how they would never own this asset, and now they all own it and everybody's talking to you. Now all of a sudden you go into a bear market and things get quiet, you know. And so it creates this kind of and those are the people, you know, that aren't really true Bitcoiners just yet. They haven't really done the research. They don't understand. You know, there's a common thing that gets posted on Twitter a lot is 1 sat equals 1 sat, no matter what the price is, you know. And so it takes some understanding of getting to know what that really means. And so like you and I, we're talking about every Satoshi matters because we don't know what it'll be worth in the future, but we just know that more people will adopt it. And then over time, it will become worth more, whatever we're basing it off of, whether it's dollars or whatever currency, or if you back it against gold or real estate or, you know, whatever asset.
Well, one day it'll just be the unit of account and everything will be priced in Bitcoin instead. And theoretically, as the world produces more goods and services versus what we destroy on average, which you could say if you go back a million years, currently on the planet, there's more things produced by humans. So let's call it more value sits here on the earth than was here a million years ago. So from a net perspective, even though many things have been built and destroyed, we still have more than we used to have. And so assuming society is positively productive, you know, on a net basis, and you have only a single monetary system with a limited number of units, every unit should continue to go up in value forever. So the theory is you don't have more units, so you have to pack more value into those units as more value is produced by humans every day. And so what people don't see about owning Bitcoin is this limited system with a limited number of units and how it could play out in a world where that's the only money. And in the period of time between now and then, a lot of dynamics have developed and will continue to develop and morph into different, I don't even know how to say this, the way people perceive it, the way people use it. So you touched on a few things. It's a commodity, right? So in the sense that if we think of a commodity as a natural good that comes out of the earth that people don't control, they have to go get it. Bitcoin acts like that because you don't just get Bitcoin for free. You have to spend electricity to get it. So it's not just, you have to put in work to get it, just like finding oil or growing corn or digging gold out of the ground. They're all commodities because you have to go do work first. It doesn't just show up. I mean, gold can pop up out of the ground, you pick it up. That's not a lot of work, but you get my point. Mm-hmm. So as a commodity, Bitcoin fulfills that kind of those characteristics. And you have to understand a little more. I mean, the Bitcoin network was not a commodity when it first started. It was very vulnerable. It could have been hacked. It could have been taken over. It was very centralized. It grew into what I would consider a digital commodity because of the network effects, because the fact that the creator left, because we had block size wars in 2017 where the threat of a user activated soft fork was going to split the network, and people with big interest and big money had to capitulate to the worldwide user base that was not going to accept the changes they wanted to put through. These are very important characteristics that allowed Bitcoin to develop into this decentralized digital protocol that can now finally be considered a commodity, even though, as you touched on, its original purpose is as a money, a medium of exchange. So it was, you know what, part of its bootstrapping was as a medium of exchange on the Silk Road website, where people were using Bitcoin as the only form of money that could be used on Silk Road. And it was one of the things that helped bootstrap Bitcoin's adoption by getting it out into people's hands and finding a use for it as actual money. It was pegged to dollars, as it still is, and people started using it as a medium of exchange. What happened over time was, as the network grew, as it got stronger, as the narrative around the thing as a commodity going up in price very significantly over time developed past that market, that time of the market when Bitcoin was used on Silk Road, people started to realize, okay, it's got a monetary value, but it could have a much higher one if I just hold on to this. And so the HODL meme, which is on your hat, I think that started out in 2015. Guy on a Reddit or something, drunk post about not being able to hold on to his Bitcoin. He was a bad trader.
Yeah,
It's pretty,
yeah, exactly.
you know all about it.
Uh-huh.
But the collective Bitcoin ecosystem started to realize, I say that loosely because each person individually has to make their own choice. But the narrative starts going like, this thing's going to go to the moon and blah, blah, blah. And so now it's the struggle between, do I spend it? Do I hold it? Right. It is a commodity, but it's also a currency. It can be used right now today. Thousands, if not millions of people around the world use it. And some people literally earn and spend on a Bitcoin standard. You can listen to BTC Sessions. What was the most recent interview I listened to him? It was on what Bitcoin did. And he talked about, he gets his pay in Bitcoin. He has to consider what the exchange rate risk is going to be. And what he immediately does is he converts whatever Bitcoin he has to fiat immediately and then pays his bills, because he gets paid in a fiat denomination of Bitcoin. So the amount of Bitcoin he gets goes up and down, but it's in fiat terms. So as long as he doesn't see a huge change in the price from the moment he gets it to the moment he pays his bills with it through the conversion and everything, that could be done within minutes. You're not taking a big risk. And so you can live on Bitcoin, and then he can save all the rest and then selectively decide if he wants to spend any of the rest on extracurricular during the month or the week between the next paycheck. So there's ways. He's just one of many that have learned to live on a Bitcoin standard. I spend Bitcoin and I immediately replace it, spend and replace. So I'm trying to help the Bitcoin economy by paying some people in Bitcoin who want to get paid in Bitcoin, but I don't want to run out of sats. I don't want my sat count to go lower. So if I know I'm going to spend something in Bitcoin, $350, I'll go out and buy 400 worth of Bitcoin. I'll end up with a few extra sats just for the hell of it. Because whatever the price is at the time, I'm paying the bill in fiat, but paying it with sats. I'm replacing the sats with fiat back into my account within minutes, and I'm a tiny exchange rate risk. Maybe sometimes it goes in my favor. So it's not all that hard once you get it. The bigger point is, we have the possibility as a species to have a monetary network on the future that will finally be the fairest ever. And that takes a little bit to grasp. That's a big statement if you really think about it. But the fairest monetary system is Bitcoin. It's never been seen before. And so I like the idea of what's known as triple entry accounting. So if you and I have, some type of a business arrangement, we have accounts, we each have debit and credit accounts with each other, and we're buying and selling goods back and forth. We both know the balances of those accounts, and we keep each other honest. That's essentially with the trust of doing business together. You're always going to pay off your balance with me, and I'm going to pay you, and we keep going for years, and we keep trusting each other. As soon as somebody outside looks at me and you and our little arrangement here, they don't know if they should trust either one of us, and they don't even know if our records are correct. Only us know that. Triple entry accounting allows everybody in the world to see the transactions you and I have made, even if they don't know who we are. And they can not only see the transactions we've made, they can see the genesis of the coins, the currency we use to make those transactions from the very first day that those units of measure were created within the system. A lot of people don't recognize that Bitcoin is a closed loop system. The digital files that we call Bitcoins are created within the system, and they stay within the system the whole time. They never go anywhere. They're essentially represented.
There's no erosion in the money, which is great.
No. And what people don't realize is when you own a Bitcoin, you own the ability to tell the entire network to change its copy of the ledger uniformly. That's what you own when you own a Bitcoin. There's a file that represents a Bitcoin you own that you have a private key to. And as long as you're the only one that has the private key, where that Bitcoin sits on the ledger at an address is the terminology. Everybody has a copy of the exact same Bitcoin sitting at the exact same address. And that's your Bitcoin at your address, and you want to go buy something. And you want to tell the world, hey, I'm spending this Bitcoin. I'm going to send it to this address. I'm going to send some from Surfer Jim to Chris. Chris got another address, and the whole network sees his address, and it's empty. And I say, hey, everybody, Chris is going to sell me a lawnmower. I'm going to give him a piece of a Bitcoin, and I'm going to send it from my address to your address. And within the system, the whole network looks at that transaction and goes, okay, Surfer Jim had the Bitcoin. Chris has an address. They both look legit. We'll move Surfer Jim's Bitcoin. I'll change my copy, but it's going to be tentative. It's going to sit there. I'm going to just a tentative copy. It looks good. He signed a transaction. It looks like he's allowed to move it. He's got authority to move it, but I'm just going to make it temporary until it gets into one of these things called a block. And without getting into the technical way about how Bitcoin works, your transaction, once it's in a block, is now moved forever. And every single copy on the network updates. And the Bitcoin that was in my account, let's call it, my address, has now moved over to yours. And everybody changes it. And now as soon as it's in yours, you control the address it sits at. And I can't get it back. You have to release it with a signature at your end. And the whole network will look at it and wait until it gets confirmed in a block. And then all of a sudden it will be moved again. And the whole system checks itself. This is the triple entry accounting. So
Yeah,
that
maybe we
every
should
single, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was saying maybe we should take a second and just to talk about some of the mechanics behind that, because I think it gets lost in a lot of translation when we're talking to new people in Bitcoin
Sure.
about the differences between what a miner is and what a node is, and really what their operation is. You know, from a miner's standpoint, it's really to collect all those transactions into a mempool and then to organize them within a block. And then once they solve that algorithmical problem, kind of being the first in the race, if you will, then their block gets put into the network. And then the nodes are kind of like the auditing system or the auditing account managers that basically look at the entire blockchain and determine whether or not the transaction that Jim and I made together is actually a valid transaction or not. And then once that gets confirmed by 6 other confirmations of that this transaction taking place, then it's the money is solidified there, and then you can move it around the network.
So that could be considered slightly misleading, that statement, even though it's not incorrect. 6 transactions. Are you familiar with why there's people think of 6?
No, I know it doesn't have to be 6.
No, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Well,
I
there was a time in history where one mining pool mined 6 blocks in a row. And it was a time where at that time it never happened before. I don't even know if it's ever happened again. I think it was called BTC Guild. And we're talking before 2017, before I even got into Bitcoin, this had happened. And so people looked at that as a threat model and said, you know, these people, since they keep mining blocks, it's almost like they could alter some stuff. And even though the game theory works out, because it's random that they got 6 blocks in a row, but it still looked a little funky. And they actually voluntarily turned down their hash. I forget how the story goes. There was something, because they were good actors. They weren't trying to, you know, perform a 51% attack or anything like that. So there was the idea that if one mining pool can do 6 in a row, you should wait a little longer than that. That was how it, you know, it's not a hard and fast rule, and it doesn't really matter. Well, I mean, it does. The longer you wait, the less likely a transaction can ever be changed. And there's a very specific mathematical rule that no one can break as to why that happens. This is one of those concepts that I had to learn about, how you can trust the system without having to trust the people operating the system, because the incentives are such that the people operating the system are not going to benefit if they cheat, and they are going to benefit if they just follow the rules. So what you had referred to as the miners organizing transactions and the nodes. So miners are also nodes. They keep a copy of the entire blockchain, and they validate transactions, and they do everything a regular node does, except they do an additional task of organizing those transactions and asking the network to accept their group of transactions as the next block. But as you alluded to, they have to do something to get credit for that block, which is to find, in essence, they have to find a number smaller than a target number. It gets a little in the weeds when you say a statement like that, because people go, what does that even mean? A number lower than a target number? Okay, well, if you want, I'll explain technically what I mean by that, but I have to back up.
That. I just want to give an overall view to somebody who's new into Bitcoin.
Yeah, so
kind of knows that there's miners, knows that there's nodes, but don't really understand the verification process and why in Bitcoin we say verify, don't trust, and how that verification process takes place.
All right, I'll make it easier for somebody to understand. So what I mentioned about triple entry accounting. If in the Bitcoin network, anybody can join, right? There's no permission. You don't have to ask anybody. You just download the software and run it, right? The software is going to download the entire blockchain from the first day. And so now you have a copy of the entire ledger, and you can now check all the transactions. So you become a full node. If you wanted to mine transactions, if you want to mine blocks, you can run the software that's mining software, and you can collect transactions that are pending on the network and put them in blocks and offer them to the network as the next block. But in order to do that, you have to run a bunch of computations called hashing. And if you do it, you can, and if you get this number lower than a target number, you tell the network, hey, here's the number I got, here's the information I put in, and the whole network in a millisecond can verify if you did it correctly. And if you did, you get credit. So miners are spending money on electricity, hashing information to get a number to present to the network. And if it's accepted by the network, so this is every node saying, yeah, okay, he did it, his math works out, we can't deny it. Everybody eventually says, yep, you get credit for that block. And in getting credit, you get brand new Bitcoin that are issued into the system, currently at 6.25 for every block, roughly every 10 minutes. That is the incentive to mine Bitcoin. You get free Bitcoin out of the system that everybody recognizes as brand new, legitimate free Bitcoin, because you got it as credit for putting a valid block at the end of the chain. So again, for somebody brand new listening to all that, that's probably still going to go over some people's heads because there's still a lot of technical words in there, but that's what's going on. Nodes verify everything, miners verify everything, and are also attempting to get blocks added by doing a bunch of computational work and then presenting it to the network for acceptance.
Awesome answer. I hadn't really planned on going down this train of thought in this interview, but while we're there, I think another important thing that we should touch on for somebody new into Bitcoin is the idea of why there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoin in existence, and how this process of the 2-week difficulty adjustment and the 4-year halving cycle, ultimately the mathematics of that equate down to 21 million, even though that was the hard cap set, but how we ultimately get to that hard cap, and how the inflationary or deflationary technology built into Bitcoin is really what gives it a lot of value.
Do you want me to just address that? That's more of a statement and not a question. But
yes, yeah. If you could just address the how when we typically say on average every 10 minutes, why is it on average, and why isn't it exactly 10 minutes?
See, now that's perfect, because I alluded to the fact that I said a bunch of things that sound technical and can make someone's head spin. So why did I say on average? Okay, perfect. All right. So Satoshi was pretty smart, right? Satoshi Nakamoto, the person or persons that gets credit for inventing Bitcoin, who left the project after 2 years and hoped it would last, created a system. I apologize if you hear a little background noise. There's someone revving their engine outside. He created a system that is actually self-regulating. It's absolutely fascinating. And this is, again, it goes down to the rules of the protocol. So let me just back up and say that Bitcoin is a set of rules. It's a protocol that is run on each individual computer. The computers talk to each other, and they're all running the same set of rules, essentially. And that's why every node on the network can validate every transaction, because they all have the same set of rules they're validating against. And so he set up this system in such a way that I think he was smart enough to realize that he had to get a lot of these Bitcoin out fast to the people who saw the system for what it was meant to be, before the average person, before government, before people who would try to ruin the system could get a hold of too many of these digital files that we call Bitcoin. So what he did was he created an issuance schedule where every 10 minutes and I'll explain that in a second, somebody that adds a block to the chain was going to get 50 brand new Bitcoin. And then 4 years into it. And then, so what happened 4 years in, 210,000 blocks is the actual number. And it took actually less than 4 years in the beginning, because the blocks were coming faster than 10 minutes. But essentially 210,000 blocks into it, literally half the supply was already out in the first, literally a little more than 3 years. Half of all the Bitcoin was already out in the world in somebody's possession or lost. Then that block reward, every 10 minutes when a block gets credited to some miner, the amount of new Bitcoin went in half. This is what we call the halving. And it takes place about every 4 years, because an average 10-minute block over 210,000 blocks takes 4 years. So the first halving occurred, and it went down to 25 Bitcoin as a block reward. That happened again to 12 and a half. We're down now to 6.25. Now, what's interesting about that is we've got, like, I want to say 90 some odd percent of the Bitcoin have already been issued 14 years in. And so they're in the hands of a lot of strong holders that get what this is. And this has happened slowly over time before a lot of regular folks that just want to make some fiat gains, before government, before regulation got in the way and tried to restrict it. This is one of the good features about Bitcoin. But one of the reasons this works is because as people look at Bitcoin, they see the value of Bitcoin, they say, whoa, I got to get me some of that. The value keeps going up. You're telling me all I got to do is turn on a computer and run this software and I might be able to get this stuff for free? Hold on a second. That's it. So that now you got an industry of miners developing because they're going like, all I got to do is spend electricity. I can get these free Bitcoin that are becoming worth thousands. Now, what happens if a lot of people start trying to win the reward for that block? What happens is the network, the total network, what we call hashing power, the amount of guesses that are happening to guess that number. Everybody has the same target. So they're all guessing. So now you got more people guessing. So what's going to happen is they're going to guess, somebody's going to guess that number sooner. When more people are guessing, statistically, this is how it works. Now, if that happens, the blocks are going to keep coming in faster than 10 minutes. Now, the network actually monitors itself. It timestamps every block. And it knows, on average, over 2 weeks, all the software, everybody's software is doing this calculation the same way. It's all saying, wait, in the last 2 weeks, how fast on average have these blocks been coming in? And if a lot of people are trying to mine Bitcoin and make it go faster, or get the Bitcoin themselves, they're going to make the blocks go faster. And all of a sudden, the system is going to say, wait a minute, they're going too fast. And they will raise what's called the difficulty adjustment. They'll raise the target number. They'll actually lower the target number. It's literally how it works. There's this number that miners are trying to look for when they're hashing information. I won't go beyond that. And if the blocks are coming in too fast, the network itself will do a calculation and say, the new number you have to guess below is this number. And now it's harder to guess because more people are guessing. And it slows down the block times. Some people might find it not profitable to keep mining because now it's taking 10 minutes and not getting enough rewards and they're going to shut their miners off. Now, all of a sudden, the blocks are taking too long because the difficulty's up high and there's not enough people guessing. And all of a sudden, the system 2 weeks later figures out, they're taking too long, and it self-adjusts again. And no one can stop this because the software makes it happen. So the target miners are shooting for constantly changes, and it self-regulates the network such that nobody can front run this thing. Nobody can mine Bitcoin any faster. So this is what's interesting. Out there in the world of commodities, if a commodity price goes up really high, other people will join in because it's very profitable. And that competition brings the price down, and it's a self-regulating price. In Bitcoin, no matter how many people try to join the network, it's a self-regulating issuance. So the adjustment changes in the price. So the difference is the price changes when you can add more units. But when you can't add more units faster, the value changes. I hope I said that well, but there is this dichotomy between the ability to add more units because you can grow more corn or dig for more gold versus no matter how hard you try, no matter how many people try, you can't issue any Bitcoin any faster. It's a very unique feature.
Yeah.
Hope that was helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's interesting. My wife and I, we run our own node. And whenever I'm looking to send Bitcoin on the main chain, not using the Lightning Network, which is a whole nother rabbit hole, we don't need to go down for this particular talk. I look at how fast blocks are being mined because there seems to be a relationship between, as more traffic is on the base layer, it creates more demand for that 1 megabyte block space to be, for your transaction to be entered into that block. And so there's another economic piece to the Bitcoin blockchain, which is the subsidy reward or the fee, not the subsidy reward, that would be the Bitcoin that's rewarded, but the fee structure that's in there. And Pierre Richard was actually, I was just listening to an interview that he did with Preston Pish on the Investors podcast, and he was talking about this particular idea, about when we get to, I think it's like 2140 or something like that, when all the Bitcoin have been released for the block reward. And then so the entire network is just based on this fee structure, kind of like you could think of it like a credit card transaction fee. in order to get in there. So if there's not a lot of demand to get into a block, the fee will be low. But if there's a lot of traffic and a lot of transactions that are trying to be entered into a block, people will bid up the fee to make sure that their transaction gets into a block faster than other transactions might, so that their transaction gets loaded in there. And so the Satoshi Nakamoto's idea of this, the economics that he had, along with the software understanding and hardware understanding that he had, is just so far leaps and bounds beyond anything that anybody else has ever thought of. And so I know I'm going on a tangent here, but I just get, as you talk about it, I just start thinking about all these things and just the things that make me excited about this protocol. But to go back to what I was saying about how when I'm sending Bitcoin on the main chain, I always like to see kind of roughly how long the blocks are taking to mine, because when sometimes I'll send it, and if I'm starting to see blocks that are being mined in a lot of, sometimes it'll happen in less than a minute. You'll see one block mined, and then 37 seconds later, you'll see another block mined. And then it'll take, 12 minutes for the next block to be mined. And I just kind of want to have an understanding of, when I'm sending coins off an exchange into my own cold storage, how long it should take for me to start wondering how much traffic is taking place in the Bitcoin network, and how much fee it's going to cost me to send those Bitcoin.
Oh, I had to mute you for a second because there's guys in the neighborhood here rev their cars at night because they're gearheads. I don't even know. It's very loud.
Yeah, I know that was more of a statement than a question, but
yeah, no, that's all right. I pulled up mempool.space while you were talking just because I was curious. So the last block that was mined was 15 minutes ago. The one before that was 19 minutes ago. So they were only 4 minutes apart. And what's interesting is there's absolute randomness every single block. They can come in 1 second apart. They can come in an hour apart. But statistically, they'll be about 10 minutes. Yeah. And when you look at this thing, so currently the fees to get a transaction in, high fees are 16 sats per V byte, and low fees are 2, because there's only 3 blocks in the mempool, 3 full blocks of transactions backed up. So that's not a lot. There is a downward difficulty adjustment estimated in 1,690 blocks of 4.23%. So apparently, on average, the blocks have been coming in longer than 10 minutes because the system is going to adjust downward to make it a little easier for them to come in faster, even though we saw 4 minutes apart on the last 2 blocks. But again, it's just an average, because between the second and the third block back, there is 26 minutes in difference. And then the next block was 4 minutes again. And the one before that was 10 minutes, literally exactly. So it's all over the place, but that is the randomness. And that's why it's measured over 2016 blocks, which is what it would take 10 minutes over 2 weeks. Yeah. So that's a constant 2-week adjustment, and that keeps the blockchain going at a certain speed. Just to elaborate on something you touched on, which you weren't trying to make a point about, but there's limited space in these blocks. And there was an argument back in 2017 to increase the size. I referenced it as the block size wars. And it's
a great book. Look it up on Amazon.
Yeah,
read it. It's a great book.
If you want to learn Bitcoin history, it's part of what you should learn. So the fact that the blocks are limited creates a condition where, when you want to get a transaction added, you might put a fee on it. And this was the incentive. The idea that when the block subsidy, the free Bitcoin, goes low enough, miners will still be incentivized to collect transactions, try to get that number, that target number, beat the target number, and add blocks onto the chain and get the transaction fees that are attached to those transactions. And what you referenced, Pierre Richard's interview with Preston Pish, he talked about the up and down nature of the fee base. And he even described the situation all the way down to one miner. That people would be concerned about, would collude and maybe restrict transactions and whatnot. But again, he outlined it quite well. I don't want to go over the whole thing, but there is game theory incentives that work here in such a way that conditions would probably develop that would cause other people to jump in, because fees would go up because people wouldn't get their transactions included. And so the game theory works in such a way that it should the fees should equal the value it takes to mine blocks so that you would stay in the game. Because again, if people drop off, they're not enough fees, they're going to drop off. They're not going to spend the electricity. Well, as soon as they drop off, the difficulty goes down. That means the people mining blocks are going to get more of them. They're going to come in faster. Some people will be incentivized to keep doing it. And as they start making money, it'll go back and forth. Some miners will come back online. Oh, wow, it's worth it again. The fees are up. So it's a self-regulating system. And if it was left alone, which it's meant to be, I mean, this is not meant to be regulated by a government. It's meant to be regulated by math. And it is regulated by, I mean, it's like we call it TikTok next block every 10 minutes. This thing's just been going steady for 14 years with only like one hiccup that I know of. I think they rolled back the chain once because of a bug they found real early. Again, this was at a time when it wasn't decentralized. At this point now, this is like a living organism with a heartbeat. There's not really anybody that's able to stop this thing. It's way too decentralized around the world. And it just keeps working, man. It's just a fascinating thing. But the way it all fits, this is, again, you're going to go study and really want to learn about Bitcoin. If you want to know more about why the blocks are so small, some people call it so small, and why they fill up and why they back up, you just have to learn the theories, the economics, why it matters to have it this way, why having smaller blocks allows anybody currently to this day to still download 14 years worth of data and get all the way back to the tip of the chain so that you can verify every single Bitcoin and every single transaction. Again, a concept people don't realize is that, like, you go to the bank and you look at a number on a screen, it's what the bank tells you have. In the Bitcoin network, you can run a full node, get a copy of the entire blockchain, and you can know exactly where all the Bitcoins sit, including your own, the ones that you control, and nobody can tell you otherwise. You literally can see the whole thing. No one's hiding anything from you, and you're the only one that can move them around. And so there's no cheating in this system. Nobody can collude to take your Bitcoin away from you or anything like that. It's just such a fascinatingly different system, but it has to be made in such a way that nobody could stop you from joining. Now, there could be a point in time 100 years from now that it takes 5 years to download the blockchain for somebody that wants an entire copy. Maybe it becomes impractical and there'll be a limited number of the entire blockchain out there, and people will have to struggle to preserve them and not let them die out, as the authority, the historical record of all the Bitcoin. But currently, the blockchain is still small enough that anybody within a few days or a week, depending on how fast your computer is, can have an entire copy of this thing, and no one on the planet can stop you from downloading that information. Nobody. And now you join the network. No one can stop you. You don't have to sign up. You don't need an email. You don't have to ask permission. You just join. Now you got to get Bitcoin. Getting Bitcoin is a different story. If you have to go to some on-ramp that's controlled by a government and you got to give them your ID and everything else, now somebody knows you own some Bitcoin, but you're still allowed to get it. Most places in the world, you're allowed to own Bitcoin. Once you own it outside of where you bought it from, and it's just within the network and you're controlling your own Bitcoin, now you're like on your own and no one could do anything. It's just so different.
And there are ways to get Bitcoin without using KYC. Know your customer protocols, like you're talking about, through on-ramps and off-ramps using typical exchanges like Coinbase or Kraken or Gemini. You can use Bitcoin ATM machines. You can use HODL HODL, which is an online resource, or you can use another one called BISC, which are peer-to-peer exchanges where you can meet up in real life and exchange Bitcoin for value, whether it be a chair or money or whatever else. So there are ways to do that. Or if you sell a good or a service, like my wife and I, we sell books. And
I was going to say that's the best way to do it, because somebody that wants to help build the Bitcoin circular economy, that's willing to spend some of their Bitcoin, would be perfectly happy to pay you in Bitcoin. Now it's up to you to decide if you're going to cash that back to fiat to pay some bills or leave it in Bitcoin. But ultimately, within the Bitcoin network, there's only 2 entities on the planet that would know who had that Bitcoin and where it went. I mean, it's possible somebody could know, the person giving it to you, some entity could know that they have it. But once they give it to you, only they and you know that you have it. And unless the government, forces them to tell the government where they sent it to, and then they come knocking on your door, essentially nobody else knows you have it. That's what's considered KYC free Bitcoin in a sense.
On that FUD topic of money laundering, I think there was something that you brought up before, you touched on, where you can go back and look at every transaction, that you can basically look at the history of a Bitcoin and see all the wallets that it's touched all the way back through the blockchain, all the way back to its genesis. And what's going to be interesting in the future, and what I really like about it too, is, people say that, oh, well, you can launder money with Bitcoin. And it's like, really, laundering money with Bitcoin is the worst possible thing you want to do with this thing, for two reasons. One, because the FBI knows about it for a long time, and the systems they have in place to be able to monitor the blockchain are better than anything you could ever think of. But also because you could actually take a look back at your Bitcoin, and you could see that your Bitcoin maybe have touched not just the United States, but Canada, Mexico, El Salvador, Nigeria, Congo, South Africa, Europe. Because it's a closed system, and the world is a closed system, these Bitcoins will ultimately get anywhere and everywhere all over the system as they're transacted with over and over and over again, which is really kind of a cool idea as more and more people come onto the network and start using it. One of the things that we like to talk about in the Bitcoin space for us hardcore Bitcoiners is, like what you were saying, you got to use the technology. Just putting your money onto an exchange and buying it and leaving it on the exchange isn't really helping the Bitcoin ecosystem. I mean, yeah, okay, you're taking some physical supply off of, out of sale, so people can't buy it. But unless you're using it and seeing the technology and seeing how it's used, and doing all the things that we've talked about here for the last 45 minutes about kind of what's under the hood in the Bitcoin network, and how the nodes work and how the miners work, and how you have to exert energy in order to run your miner, in order to secure the network. All of these things are what create value in Bitcoin. And for the people out there, I was just having a conversation with a guy I play basketball with, who's a wealth manager for Wells Fargo. And I asked him about Bitcoin. He said, "Oh yeah, I know about Bitcoin." I said, "Yeah, what is it?" And he said, "Oh, it's a digital currency that's fugazi. It's basically nothing." And so I asked him some additional questions about it, and he was just like, "Oh, well, it's not like Apple or something like that." I'm like, "Okay, well, what is Apple?" And then he had a hard time explaining that. So you see this in the typical finance world. You see this groupthink that's very hardcore, and it's like a very hard nut to crack in order to get people to open up their minds, and you start realizing that people who are managing your money don't really know about money. I mean, my background is in finance. My degree's in finance. You talked about Austrian economics. I took economics 101 and 102. Never really talked about Austrian economics in either one of those courses. It's all Keynesian debt-based monetary policy and whatnot. And it wasn't until I started becoming a gold bug and learning about gold and silver, and then learning about central banking and reading, Creature from Jekyll Island, and then I learned about Bitcoin, and then started that whole rabbit hole journey, that I realized, oh my gosh, Austrian economics, this is a completely different way of looking at the world, and it makes more sense for us, for equality, to give everybody the same opportunity to have a great life for the limited amount of time we spend here on the planet. So
that was a lot.
Yeah. So again, it was a rant. There wasn't.
Hey, wait, I want to say something though. I want to
Hey,
address a couple of things you mentioned early on. You mentioned laundering money. So laundering money is a political concept where some people believe they have the right to know where you got your money and where you're sending it. That's what laundering money represents. That is, some government entity doesn't believe you have the right to send your money to a certain country or receive it from a certain person, because you're doing something they deem illegal. Anything that's illegal is simply something that men decided, they wrote magic words on paper and decided, if you do this in our quote unquote jurisdiction, in some magical boundary we drew on a map that represents the ground, if you do that, we're going to do something to you. So laundering money is a joke. People should be able to do whatever the hell they want with their money. Their money represents their time. So we're just talking about stupid, corrupt government bullshit when you talk about money laundering, right? So anyway, I just needed to make a point, because I can't stand the way this stuff is talked about in the world. I mean, the whole concept of money laundering is absurd. It's just absurd on its face. Anyway, then you had touched on the concept of moving Bitcoin around the world. And so I like to describe Bitcoin as an Excel spreadsheet. Every box on the spreadsheet, and this is an infinitely large spreadsheet. There is no limit to the amount of boxes on the spreadsheet. And every wallet that creates a new address creates another box on the spreadsheet. And it tells the network that a new box was created and the box is empty. And when I send Bitcoin from my box to your box, it simply changes the copy of that giant Excel spreadsheet on every node. So Bitcoins never go anywhere. They don't travel around the world. They simply move from a box to a box inside every single node's software. That's what they're doing. And everybody is in sync. So when they talk about Bitcoin being sent from one country to another, it never really goes from a country. It simply goes from a box on a spreadsheet controlled by a person in one country to a different box on the same spreadsheet copied all over the world, controlled by a different person in a different country. That's all it's doing. It's moving within the same closed loop system that everybody's looking at from around the world. They just happen to be sitting in different locations, moving digital files within a system. Now, what you said doesn't take away from what it feels like is happening. Somebody in one part of the world is sending value to somebody else in the world. The way it's happening, though, is it's just happening by a change in a copy of a ledger they both have. And everybody else is agreeing to it. That's all that's actually happening. But the concept doesn't change. I want to buy something from somebody in the world. They're going to mail it to me. I'm going to send them some Bitcoin. Hey, I sent money across the world. It just is not going through a central bank. It's not being moved from this bank to that bank. It's not being loaded as gold on a ship, being moved across the ocean as transferring value. It's being transferred within a closed loop system we all get to look at. Hope that helped.
Yeah, I guess what I should have pointed to was this this ledger, this Excel spreadsheet that you're talking about is, if we're thinking about it in the most simplistic terms, can be thought of as in a stationary place, just held in the digital realm, which we called the internet or cyberspace.
Sure.
And anybody can have access to it anywhere in the world. And so almost like a safety deposit box, a digital safety deposit box, and value is being transferred between the different boxes that everybody can verify. It's all in one place. It's all in one meeting place. It's all in one forum, just online. It's not actually in the United States or the Congo or Nigeria. It's everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
Yeah, well, to be even more accurate, to say it's on the internet is true and not true at the same time, like Schrodinger's cat, right, in the box. So it's on the internet to the extent that the computer that's holding a copy of it is online. Because if you turn your node off, or if you just turn your online connection off, you still have a copy of the blockchain. You're just not getting updates anymore. Right. So the copy is on every individual node. It's on the internet to the extent that your node's talking to every other node, staying updated. That's really it. It's not on the internet ever. It's not even on your hardware wallet. Your hardware wallet is simply the device that allows you to talk to the network and prove that you get to control one of these digital files in one of these boxes that everybody has a copy of. So your hardware, your Bitcoin's not on your phone. It's not on your hardware wallet. It's on a copy of everybody's computer, including yours if you have a full node. And the only reason it goes anywhere is because you take a device, you broadcast a transaction to the network with a signature that proves you have what we call the private key to a Bitcoin that's held at what we call a public key, which is the address or the box, right? So everybody can see that you have the Bitcoin in the box because they can see the public key, but they can't move it because they don't have the private key. So the way it works is called private key, public key cryptography, if I said that correctly. The point is, the way it works is a very interesting concept. I can't explain the math, but the way it works is this. You can see that I have a Bitcoin at a public address or a public key, and I sign a message that says, I want to move it. You can do math on the public key with my message, and you can know that I have the private key without seeing it. It's absolutely unbreakable. It's totally provable. I can't fudge that. There's only one way to do it. I have to sign a legitimate message with a legitimate private key. The way the cryptography works out is that anybody could look at the signature and the Bitcoin in that message and go, yep, he has authority to move it. But I still can't see the private key, or you can call it the password. And that's a very interesting concept. People don't get, that's a really hard thing to even grasp. How can that even work? But there's math behind it that apparently makes it work. So there's a lot of weird little things that go on. I had no idea this would get this technical, but this is what I had to learn.
I didn't either, Jim.
Dude, this is what I had to learn, right? If I couldn't grasp this stuff, I could not trust this system. And that lady who said you can trust the system without trusting the people was describing what I had to learn and what I'm trying to redescribe here. These functions that take place in math that no one can screw with. literally, right? The difficulty adjustment, no one can screw with. Public and private keys, no one can screw with that stuff. No one can change your software, your protocol without your permission, meaning you download the same protocol everybody else is doing. This math works. Everybody's validating all the same rules with the same damn math. Math is one of these things that's essentially can be perfect. If done well, it always works out like a hash. You hash information, you get a number. It always comes to the same number every single time. The only thing is with hashing, you never know what the answer is going to be until you do it. It's one of these weird things about how Bitcoin works and why hashing is even involved. Another deep discussion.
Yeah.
Anyway, all this stuff works. It works. You don't have to trust it. It all works based on math. And that's what's so amazing about the whole damn thing. And if you don't take the time to learn it, then you're just an idiot because you don't know what you're talking about. You have to, if you want to know why people value this thing at $17,000 for one of these digital files, you have to learn what's going on here and why no one could break in and why, why it's the path it took, all the things we've touched on tonight. There's so many reasons why Bitcoin's worth this much and why it's likely to be worth $1 million, 10 million, 100 million per Bitcoin someday out into the future for you, your kids, your grandkids, somebody.
This is the first time that we've talked to one another, and I already know based on this conversation why most of the business that you do in construction is built on referrals. Because whereas I'm trying to give a broad understanding to help people get their feet wet and start asking bigger questions and start going down this rabbit hole, your attention is in the detail. And without seeing any of your work, I already know that the work you do in your business must be amazing because you focus on the details and it's important to you. And because it's important to you, other people see the value in it and see the end product of it, which is why I think you're such a great voice in the Bitcoin space and why you have so many followers, because you have this ability to understand the technical, but talk about it in a slow, consistent, organized way that makes it easy to follow and understand.
I'm trying my best because it's one of these things that for me is a key element as to why people finally get over the hump. So some people are fine just trusting somebody they know and they say buy it and they're like, I trust you, whatever. And they don't ever care. Like most people drive a car, don't know how it works, right? So most people don't have to know how it works. I had to. And for anybody who wants to know, if you can't trust it, learn how it works, and then you won't have to trust it. You'll be able to trust it without trusting. Like I said, trust the system, not the people that are in it. Don't trust me. I tell people all the time, don't trust, verify, including don't trust me. Anything I've said tonight, I could have said something incorrect. I could have misspoken, even if my intent was good. You never know. So yeah, you just got to verify this stuff yourself. And what's nice, it's open source protocol, right? So if you don't know how to read or write code, you can go to school and learn. Then you can spend the next 3 years before you ever buy any Bitcoin. You can learn how to code. Then you could learn how the Bitcoin protocol works. You can read a bunch of books. You could take Jimmy Song's course on developing around Bitcoin. And you could download the binary, which is like the source code. You can compile it yourself. I had to learn all these terms. And you can literally know that nobody has messed with that code. Literally, you took the raw code off the internet, you compiled it, made sure every rule is in place. You didn't trust anybody. You can read every line of the code and then you can launch the software and watch it work. And you go, holy crap, I didn't have to trust a single person. All I had to do was learn how to code. All right. So if you're not going to do that, trust somebody who can code and see if maybe they're not lying to you. Because everything we do in life is based on trusting something, right? If I tell you to climb up that ladder, you're either going to trust that the ladder by looking at it is safe, or I know it's safe. Or you're going to test every rung as you step on it to make sure it's not going to break, because we have to trust. We have to go through the world figuring out where to trust, who to trust, what to trust. It's just the nature of life. And Bitcoin, money in general, it's all the same stuff. So figure out how to trust this thing and get some soon before it's too late. Hey, I just want to mention, I left this up on my screen, the mempool.space. Since we've been talking, a block came in 7 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, 12 minutes ago, 14 minutes ago, 17 minutes ago, and 37. So you've got 2 minutes apart, 2 minutes apart, 3 minutes apart, and then 20 minutes apart. And the mempool is now empty down to a half a block. And the difficulty, the projected difficulty, we're only 16% into the next period. We've got 1,685 blocks left to go. And the difficulty already adjusted to 3.38. When I first said it, it was 4 point something. So as blocks came in faster over the last 10 or 15 minutes, the entire network already said, whoa, they just sped up again. So that planned difficulty change is now going to be less. And by the time we get to that day, it could be nothing like what I'm looking at right now, because it's going to keep adjusting up and down. This system regulates itself literally every block.
Mhm.
It's really amazing. It's like a living organism. It's kind of wild. So anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I want to change subjects just a little
Sure,
bit
sure,
here.
sure.
We've been talking for about an hour here. There's two more topics I want to talk about. If it's one topic, I have two questions on, and
Sure,
it's
no
kind of
problem.
like a 2020 year, 2022 in review, right? So I want to get your perspective on what you think the most positive leap forward Bitcoin has taken in this last year.
Crypto exchange is getting wrecked. Is definitely one of the best things to ever happen. We pay the price when the value of Bitcoin and everything else goes down. And so for those people trying to live on Bitcoin or who need to sell it and can't get as much fiat in return, they suffer. But Bitcoin is not crypto. Crypto is not Bitcoin. The crypto industry is a bunch of grifters that have piggybacked on the open source nature of Bitcoin's code and offered to the world the next better Bitcoin. And none of it is anything like Bitcoin. I like to say Bitcoin is on one side of a technological wall, and no other altcoin, shitcoin can ever get on that side of that wall. It can never happen. It's like you can't discover the same thing twice. You can't invent Bitcoin twice. Bitcoin is a protocol unto itself that can't be replicated at this point. Again, you got to learn the history. You got to understand how this thing stayed alive with no leader, how the group of citizens that were the ones running the code, checking the code, and helping to bootstrap the network. There was a lot of people that understood the importance of this thing and didn't want it corrupted, didn't want it to be just a get rich quick scheme. And without that type of what I will refer to as a type of altruism, this network never could have grown. And now that it's here on the planet, you can't replicate that because people already know this exists and the incentives are completely different for anybody who'd try to bootstrap another one. I kind of went off on a tangent. Yeah, so I basically, the idea that other cryptocurrencies can be anything even close to Bitcoin is an absurdity. The concept of a blockchain and how it works I say it this way, a blockchain is only good for two things: creating digital files and then keeping track of them within that blockchain. And I say to that in a proof of work blockchain is what we call proof of work, proof of stake. I'm not going to get into that right now, but in a proof of work blockchain, all you can do is create digital files and then keep track of them within that system. If you want to link that to anything on the outside world, you need a trusted third party to do it. Except in the case of Bitcoin, where you link the effort to create new Bitcoins to electricity that was used to create them. But it's done in a system that nobody is trusted to tell the system how much electricity was used. The use of electricity is inferred by the difficulty adjustment, how many guesses it takes to win a block and have it added to the chain is evidence that you had to have used electricity. So it's an indirect connection to the physical world and the absolute proof that somebody did work. All these other blockchains are so far from that, not to mention the extent that they all have a small group of people that can change the code anytime. They have foundations, they have corporations, they have issuance people, they have all kinds of governance that Bitcoin doesn't have because there's nobody in charge of Bitcoin. So to go back to your question, what's the best thing that happened in 2022? You know, we saw a lot of shaking out of a lot of bullshit in the industry that a lot of smart people were taking advantage of regular folks by pumping this crap. A lot of people, like, I'll say it straight out, Kevin O'Leary, who got paid $15 million to pump FTX. That man is smart enough to grasp the difference between Bitcoin and shitcoins. And if he knows it, he should go to jail for just straight up lying to the public. And if he is that lazy to have not learned it, then he's a moron and he shouldn't be in his position. He's a horrible spokesperson for any investment if he doesn't even know how it works.
What frustrates me so much about Kevin O'Leary is it sounds like he spent $9.7 million. He just bought a bunch of shit tokens with and put them on the FTX exchange, and then took the balance of that $15 million and bought equity into FTX itself. And so when he talks about losing $15 million, he didn't actually lose any money because
No,
that was
no,
all money that was given to him on paper. He
I know.
never held custody of any of that money to begin with.
I know. It's a joke. It's a big joke. He could have took the 15 million and did whatever, but he's gonna. They're all shaking hands in the background. Yeah, I'll put it right back on. We'll pump it up. I'll talk it up. Whatever. I mean, he was doing the pump and dump. He was going to dump it one day after it pumped, and it didn't pump, and now he's all upset,
Well,
right?
he
And
was trying to regulate Bitcoin, talking about blood
yeah,
Bitcoin, and
it's absurd. The man doesn't get it. And if he does get it, then he's really straight up lying to people, which is disgusting. Like that guy Chamath, he's just as bad. He's up there pumping all kinds of stuff, knowing he's in the background. He's one of these VC guys that are throwing the money to advertise these things, to pump them up, to get. And then, I mean, the charts, it's just like 10,000 charts that all look the same. They get pumped up and they go to zero over and over and over. Thousands and thousands of these things come and gone. The average person doesn't take the time to learn the history of this ecosystem and how many times this has happened. So I say the best thing that happened was all these things blew up. Celsius, 3 Hours Capital, FTX. This is great. This is great for all these idiots that think this is, that crypto is something. It's a joke. Crypto is just grifting on Bitcoin, and it's all going to zero, including Ethereum. It's all going to zero.
So not to put words in your mouth, so to simplify, you'd say that the best thing that happened in 2022 is kind of the purification of the space, if you will, and the
I like it.
elimination of the leverage.
Unfortunately, it's we didn't go far enough because Ethereum still exists and Tron still exists and a whole bunch of other Cardano with Charles Hoskinson. What another grifter. The guy, it just blows my mind. He just talks so much shit and people believe him, man. He comes across smart. It's really sad. There's a lot of these people out there that they got millions of followers. They've made a ton of money buying and selling these altcoins, shit coins. And so they're revered. They're like, oh, he made all these millions. They've got pictures of their Lambos and their mansions and whatever. And they really did make a lot of money in this space, a lot of whether it's fiat money or they turned it into Bitcoin or whatever. But they did it on a narrative that equated shit coins to Bitcoin. A lot of people fell for it and lost their shirts. A lot of people lost their life savings because they didn't take the time to do the research. I spent 6 months watching the price triple, thinking I missed it. Because I was just like, I'm not just throwing my money. I don't know. Am I that special that I had to be careful about where my money was going to go? How is it there's so many stupid people that throw thousands at these things without knowing what it is? I don't get that personally, but maybe I'm just unique. I don't know. I'm not unique.
There's so many stories out there, and I'm sure you have a lot of them too, where you talk to somebody about Bitcoin and they go, oh yeah, that sounds interesting. And then you help them get set up on an exchange and help them set up to buy it. And they're like, okay, I'll buy it later. And then you talk to them a few weeks later and you say, well, did you end up buying? You say, well, I bought Dogecoin.
Well, I haven't had that, although I haven't had that, but probably some people I convinced to buy went and buy the other stuff and just didn't tell me because they know how much of a maximalist I am. But there's also people that have bought, they still got their coins on Coinbase, and every time I see them, I'm like, did you get your hardware wallet set up yet? Oh, I know, I got to do that, man. Oh fuck, whatever. I can't make them do it. Yeah. I can only lead them in the right direction, and I can only answer their questions if they have them, and that's all I can do. And it is what it is. I again, a long time ago, I stopped caring if people listen to me. I really don't care. I'm out here to, talk truth the best I understand it, but I really don't care if you don't listen to me. It's not going to hurt my life. I know what I'm doing. So.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask you on the concept of the idea of freedom money, because, a lot of people think us Bitcoin maximalists are kind of conspiracy theorists. And we talk a lot about the founding fathers of the United States and why they separated themselves from the English, and the freedom aspects of men being able to choose their own right way in life, whatever that decision happens to be. And like you were saying with money laundering is basically such a gaslight from the government, because no one should be able to tell you how you spend your money and where you spend it. And what could be a frivolous activity today could be completely legal tomorrow under government terms. And there's really the hypocrisy behind it is just it's overwhelming.
Yeah, everywhere.
So when we talk about freedom money with Bitcoin and the self-sovereignty aspect of it, what would you tell somebody who's thinking about getting into Bitcoin but is a little intimidated by the self-custody nature that us Bitcoiners push and the necessity of it?
So you're saying somebody who has come to the understanding that the best way to have Bitcoin is to control it yourself And they also have the further realization that there's no customer service if you lose your private keys. Is that what you're alluding to?
There's no bank, there's no insurance
Yeah.
policy behind it.
Yeah, the personal responsibility is the new counterculture, as Adam Meister likes to say. He was another one of my early influences. His handle on Twitter is @TechBalt, BALT. Really smart guy. He's been into Bitcoin since, I don't know, maybe 2013 or 15. He saw it early. He's had a podcast for many years, and he talks about, he has one of these catchphrases: personal responsibility is the new counterculture. Society has been trained to trust authority and let, the nanny state take care of me kind of thing in a lot of ways. Very few people are self-starters or rely on themselves to get what they need in life. They learn how to fix their own car, fix their own house, whatever. Hundreds of years ago, people had to learn how to take care of themselves. There was nobody to rely on, right? So our systems are such, you lose your email password, you get it back. Somebody's got it, they could reset stuff. It doesn't work that way in Bitcoin, and we don't want it to work that way. You don't want any central authority to be able to restore your Bitcoin, because they can restore it, they can take it away. So the system is meant to be where each Bitcoin is controlled by a private key, which is in the possession of a human being, essentially. And if you lose it, you lose the ability to move the Bitcoin around within the network, and essentially it's lost. And that's scary. I get it. But you don't get the ability to control your own asset with the responsibility that comes with that, which is you control your own asset, not somebody else, which means be careful. Do what you got to do. Thankfully, some smart Bitcoiners have figured out all kinds of safety techniques to employ that you don't really have to worry too much. We don't have to get into them right here, but if you do want to do this, take your time, right? You got Bitcoin, it's on a custodial exchange. Okay, don't have a whole thing sent to your hardware wallet the first day before you practiced with $10 on your hardware wallet. Wipe it out, restore your wallet, make sure you know what you're doing, and then have them send all the Bitcoin to you once you're comfortable. It's not that hard. It just takes a little bit of effort. Once you got it down, I feel very comfortable controlling my own Bitcoin. My private seeds are backed up in places that are safe as far as I'm concerned, and my heirs can get to them if they need to. And yeah, I'm not really too worried about it, but that's what it takes to operate in this system. You have to be willing to be responsible for your own money. It's no different than carrying cash around in your pocket. Not many people do it anymore, but there was a day when everybody had cash in their pocket and they were responsible for that cash. And if they lost it, they lost that amount of wealth. So you got to just be careful. Maybe you don't want to put all your Bitcoin in one hardware wallet, So this way, if you lost that one, you wouldn't lose it all. There's a lot of things you can do. There's also things that we know of, known as collaborative custody, where instead of having one private key, you can have three. And the Bitcoin protocol allows you to set up rules around moving that Bitcoin within the system, that you have to have 2 of the 3 signatures to move it. So let's say you give one to your kids, your heirs, you give one to an attorney, and you have one. And during your lifetime, maybe you and your attorney can move your Bitcoin all you want, but when you die, your attorney can't move it on his own. He has to call your daughter or your kids to move the Bitcoin. And of course, now that it's your attorney and it's not his Bitcoin, he just has one of the keys, and makes it a little safer for your heirs to get it. There's a lot of little things. You can use a company like Unchained Capital that could help you do stuff like that. And so it's not as scary as it seems, but it does require a level of responsibility most people have not stepped up to in this world, it seems. My generation, people seem to be very responsible, or at least most of them growing up. But I see a trend in society towards people taking less responsibility for their actions. Most people don't want to admit when they're wrong and apologize for things. So it's a cultural thing. I do think it stems from the broken money. I think so many things in society are a function of governments being able to control money and price signals getting messed up, and therefore people making poor choices in what to do with their time and with their value. It gets deep. This is all what I've been learning all these years, is like how all this stuff ties together. So it's freedom money. It allows you to be free. It allows you to move your money at your say so, and no one can stop you. The banking systems today, you try to withdraw $10,000 in cash from a bank. If they even have it sitting there to give to you, you have to fill out forms. It's supposed to be your own money. Bitcoin is freedom money. You move it when you want. No one can stop you. The system won't stop you. It simply is looking for a valid signature to move that file from one box on the shared spreadsheet to another box. That's all this is. And somebody in the real world is going to give you some real value as soon as they see that digital file show up in their box. It's pretty simple, but it does take that level of responsibility. But once you get it, I'll tell you this much. The feeling of being free is literal. When you know you have wealth in Bitcoin and you know the banks can't take it, you know nobody could steal it, boy, that gives you a feeling that I've never had before. I feel empowered knowing that I control my money. It cannot be taken from me. I've had bank accounts shut down and stuff like that. Luckily, I never really lost money. But boy, it's scary to think other people can control your wealth and especially shut it off.
You know what?
I talk a lot. Sorry, Chris, but I hope I'm not going overboard on some of these answers. I apologize if I am.
No, it's great. It's great. You know, on that topic that you were just saying, one of the things that I love the most about using the Bitcoin network is typically when in a day-to-day transaction, if I'm just going to the grocery store and I'm spending cash or whatever, I feel a sense of, you know, a good feeling because I got something, right? But when I'm using Bitcoin and I send that to somebody else, I feel good because I gave somebody something. You know, I got what I'm getting, but I also feel good because I know I gave them something of value. Where if I'm just giving them cash, it's just like, okay, yeah, here's some money. You know, it's more of an inclusive sort of connection with humanity too, using Bitcoin versus just cash.
I think intuitively what you're experiencing is the knowledge that the units you're giving them are worth much more than what they just gave you in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're trading with units of a restricted system, a closed system that only has a certain amount of units. And by definition, by the economics that operate on this planet among humans, those units are going to be worth more as long as the system keeps working and people use it as money. It's impossible for the economics to not work out that way. The only reason the value goes up and down in terms of fiat is because we have fiat on the planet still. And people constantly subjectively value this thing based on outside information. And so one of the things, you know, for anybody wondering, why did it go down from 69,000 down to, you know, currently around 17? That's because the market out there for this asset wasn't strong enough. Enough people didn't want to buy it because they needed the money for something else. They got liquidated on some other thing and they had to sell their Bitcoin to pay off something else. There's a lot of reasons why more sellers were in the market versus buyers. But the network itself is not affected by any of that. That's simply the value society gives to one of these digital units outside the system. The system itself, TikTok, next block, keeps going, right? So the system keeps working, which proves that it is capable of being a system that can control units we can give value to. See, we give value to pieces of paper, we give value to gold, we give value to silver, we use it as money. We can give value to digital files and use it as money because in essence, that's all we've ever done on this planet. We've given things value, but the nature of the thing is what helps allow us to give it value. So what I mean by that is money, to be given the highest value, has to be scarce. It has to be divisible. It has to be fungible. It has to be recognizable. It has to be verifiable. It has to be transportable. So the more an item can fit those categories, the stronger it fits those categories, the better it works as a thing that we can use as money. This gets into the learning the history of money. I had to learn all this stuff. Bitcoin has those characteristics, the best of anything humans have ever seen. It can act as the best money. Most people just don't know that yet. Mm-hmm. So the system keeps going, waiting for everybody else to catch up. And it's going to keep going. The people that work this system, that run it, that move transactions around, that mine blocks, that trade these digital units for goods and services in the real world, those people aren't going to stop. So the system's going to keep going while the rest of the world figures out that's a better way to transact value. And it's a better way for me to store my value because as more and more people see it, the amount of units can't be expanded at all in total, and they can't be expanded any faster than they're being expanded now. So there's two restrictions on the amount of units. So the only thing that can fluctuate is the value of the units. And based on game theory and monetary economics, the value of these units is going to go up in the future as more people adopt that system.
Yeah, and to kind of underlight
Simple as
that and
that.
highlight it an exclamation point and everything that you've just said right there. If you don't even think about it in dollar terms or euro terms or whatever currency terms, if you're just thinking about it in purchasing power terms, from
Exactly.
2018 until today, the purchasing power of Bitcoin is up 6x.
There you go. And since 2009, when the code was released, the purchasing power is up 9 million%, right? Some crazy absurd number, because you could get, I remember reading somewhere, and I really wish I could find it, 1,600 Bitcoin for $1 was like an early exchange rate where somebody was buying something and they needed thousands of Bitcoin to do it. And I don't think it was the pizza deal with Laszlo, which is like the first really recognized purchase of a real world good for some Bitcoin, which was 2 pizzas for $10,000. I believe it was somebody in Europe, maybe England, sent the Bitcoin, or Laszlo sent him the Bitcoin, and he sent fiat money to Papa John's in Florida, and they
Yeah,
delivered pizza to Laszlo's house.
yeah,
Like, so like that was pretty interesting. And Laszlo had hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin at the time. So 10,000 for some dinner for his family was like dropping the bucket. He was like trying to get rid of all these digital files he had permission to move around within a closed loop system. I'll say it the same way every time. All he had was access to digital files within a system the other guy could also look at. And he said, I'll take a bunch of those files. This might be worth something someday. I mean, it's really fascinating, because 10,000 digital files for, $40 worth of pizza is insane. You take 10,000 Bitcoin right now is worth what? Like $170 million or some insane amount. I don't even know. I'm bad at math when it comes like on my feet, but
yeah.
yeah, it's worth
How
a
much
lot.
that 10,000 Bitcoin is worth right now? Yeah, 160 million
Million or something.
dollars.
10,000 times 17,000, make it easy. Yeah, $170 million. He ate 2 pizzas worth $170 million. Oh, you have it right
It's
there.
in the
There you
book.
go. The pizza story.
It's in our
Excellent.
book, Bitcoin for
That's
Kiddos.
great. That should be. That should be. Yeah. I mean, it's really fascinating to think about these digital files were worth almost nothing, and they're now worth 17,000 US dollars for somebody to get possession of one of these things. And all it is permission to move it around within a closed loop system, so that once you move it, everybody in the system updates their copy to move in a digital file from one box to another box. It's really simple and crazy to think, but it can be a monetary system that the entire world can use and trust without trusting any of the people that are also using it. Fascinating.
All right, now to ask my second question, which
Oh
I
shit.
probably already answered. Huge
Go.
tangent we went on there. It
No
happens every
problem.
time.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
do you think the biggest detriment to Bitcoin has been the last 2022? I almost want to say it's probably the same thing.
Well,
But
the detriment is the perception by the outside world that Bitcoin is dead again, for the same reasons that I highlighted before. The crypto market is getting washed out, and people equate the two, and the price is down from where it was, and so it's already done, and I don't want to invest in that thing now. It's going down, and they think of it as investing in it. They don't think about it as buying units of the future monetary network of the world. So that's what I look at it as. I got to acquire as many of these units as possible, because once the world flips over, the more units you have, the better off you're going to be. It's like if you had more dollars in the current system. So I see it as just getting more units of that system. Most people don't. So the thing that is let's call it negative is the perception by the world that you can't trust it. It's volatile. I don't think I should invest. It's too unstable, blah, blah, blah. They just don't get what it is. And so people are now hesitant to join the network. So now adoption is slowed. That's essentially, because the bottom line is Bitcoin comes into its fullness when it is the world's monetary system, and the corruption of governments and central banks disappears off this planet, to the extent that everybody can be equally free within a monetary system that's worldwide, and price signals can get back to where they should be, where they represent true value for actual things, goods and services that are produced, priced accurately, because nobody can inflate the supply of the monetary units. And that just smooths out so many of the problems in humanity that people don't understand what this Bitcoin thing is. They don't get that it's way bigger than an investment, way bigger than I might be able to make some money, quote unquote, on the thing. It's something that will literally fix thousands of problems on this planet and help humanity be a safer, better place for everybody. And if you care anything about your kids, your grandkids, or the heirs you'll never meet, you need to get into Bitcoin and help it become the worldwide monetary system, because by doing that, the control of money gets taken out of the people who control it now, and wars go away, and so many things go away. I mean, we can go on for days on how these connections are all made, but the manipulation of money has been one of the worst things for humanity. A handful of people have prospered and millions have died and suffered as a result. And you take that control out of the hands of people and the world gets better. And I can talk about it in many ways. We're not going to do it now. We've been talking a while, but you get down those rabbit holes and you start to see how fixing the money fixes incentives all over the place. And little by little, people start. What it comes down to is this: if you want some of this monetary unit in the future, you're going to have to work to get it. You can't cheat to get it, because people are going to be very picky about how they release this Bitcoin, knowing it's very hard to get it back. See, this is why it changes incentives, because the people who control it, you see it now, you probably do it now. You're way more reluctant to release that Bitcoin. You're going to only release it for something you know is worth releasing, and you might just buy it back just to do.
That's what I was going to say. That's the habit that you find yourself in, is whenever you spend it and you realize the value of it, you immediately buy it back.
Okay, but now we're talking about a world where you can't buy it back. You can only earn it back.
Right.
That changes the game. Now you have to give real goods and services, not bullshit. You can't bullshit people, because your reputation will go out in front of you. Eventually, nobody will trust you. They won't do business with you, because the thing you're promising for that valuable Bitcoin, you're not delivering.
Mm-hmm.
This is the whole thing. This is what changes everything. So
I had actually heard some conversations on that topic in some Twitter spaces, talking with some software engineers that are working in the Bitcoin space, and they were saying how they could work in the fiat world and make almost twice as much money as what they could get working in the Bitcoin world, because people who are in the Bitcoin community and they're spending that value of Bitcoin to hire people, they understand the value of it, and the people who are getting it understand the value of it. And you absolutely do take a pay cut when you move from the fiat world into the Bitcoin world, because of that perceived future value of what you're actually getting as that hard asset that's for the future.
Yeah. I would probably say, and I don't know this for a fact, but if you're, getting paid 100 grand in your fiat, developer job, and a Bitcoin company wants to hire you as a developer, they might not give you 100 grand, but they might promise you to pay 90 grand in Bitcoin. And you go, all right, I take a 10% pay cut, but it's worth it to get paid in Bitcoin because I value having more of these units. And so there is a dynamic going on. You're absolutely right. I would say that a Bitcoin company hiring a Bitcoiner can negotiate a lower fiat equivalent salary if paid in Bitcoin,
and it works out too, because if you're looking at the monetary policy and you're saying the inflation rate is at 3.25%, and every year you're getting an annual increase of 3.25% to hold purchasing power, in the Bitcoin space, the annual interest, the annual price appreciation of the asset is much higher than 3.5%. So you can take a smaller pay up front, because the value of that purchasing power of those unit of accounts is going to buy you more in the future.
So now that statement rests on the belief that the Bitcoin network is going to be there in the future, and it's not going to break. And we are going to have blocks on average every 10 minutes. And this system is not centralized and cannot be shut off by government. So a lot rests on the statements we make about the reason to hold Bitcoin is it will be worth more in the future. The reason to dollar cost average into Bitcoin while the exchange rate price is going up and down is because inevitably, as more people adopt it, all units will be worth more someday. That theory is the only reason any of what we say makes any sense. It has to play out that way. And the logic and the economics and the game theory and the way the code works and the way the Bitcoin network has grown and the network effects and the fact that there's no leader and governments can't shut it down creates the belief that it will last, and those units will in fact become worth more, because more and more people will in fact learn these elements about Bitcoin and about the network and all these things that we've just talked about. And one person at a time will slowly adopt this system. And again, as older people die that are like Warren Buffett's never going to own Bitcoin, whatever, we don't care. He's almost done, right? But there are 5-year-olds right now whose parents own Bitcoin, and they're going to grow up with Bitcoin as the only money they know. And one day the logic will just be universal, and some people will stand around and go, I can't believe hundreds of years ago, they used to give paper away as money. And they could make as much as they want. And the average kid on the street will think how absurd it was, because they were taught by their parents the function of money and why it matters, and all the economics behind it will just be normal. But they don't want us to know this stuff in government indoctrination camps they make us go to for 12 years, and then a few more when you get into college. So yeah, I mean, I drop a lot of I say government indoctrination camps to describe public schooling, but that's all they are. I mean, they're indoctrinating kids to what they want them to know, and they don't want them to know about the Fed or how money works. So, it's been a broken system for a long time because some people control it. Now we have a system that no one controls at this point, and it can be the world's monetary system. I personally believe as one person at a time learns about it, they will see it's in their own rational self-interest to own Bitcoin. And as that keeps happening, the supply will get so much limited that the value keeps going up for those people who want a piece of that system. And one day it will just go for, I don't want your fiat money. You got to come put a roof on my house, then I'll give you some Bitcoin, right? You got to go wash my car, I'll give you some Bitcoin. It's going to turn into services for Bitcoin. Nobody's going to take fiat money ever again one day. I don't know when that's going to be. It might be beyond my lifetime, but I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, Jim, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'd love to have you back on the show. For anybody watching, you have just received a masterclass in Bitcoin 101. You may have to watch the show one more time or two more times just to grasp all the concepts that Jim has talked about on here. Jim, if people want to follow you on Twitter and learn more about Bitcoin from you, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so that's pretty much it. That's my only public facing way to get in touch with me, really. It's just Surfer Jim with a W at the end, at Surfer Jim W on Twitter. My DMs are open. I'm happy to answer questions. I love talking about this stuff. I can do this all night. It's pretty much, other than running my construction company, it's like I'm obsessed with Bitcoin every day. I'm on Spaces all the time. I'm listening to hours of podcasts every day. I got used to listening at 2x so I could squeeze in more. I do want to mention my hat. My good friend Katie, she goes by Katie the Russian on Twitter. She has a company called Plan B Passports, where she helps Bitcoiners get passports from other countries so we can remain free, freedom money and free life. So support Plan B Passports if you're looking to have more sovereignty on this planet. Yeah, so I'm big into Bitcoin. I go to conferences all the time. I've spoken at a few. I'll probably speak at some more. I'm actually going to be helping to run BitBlock Boom next year in August in Texas, and Unconfiscatable next December. I know the people who run those conferences. Again, after years of being around and going out and shaking hands, you get to know people. And I volunteered to help on both conferences, and the people who run them know me well enough to know that I'm willing to work hard and I'll help out. I was a volunteer out at Pacific Bitcoin out in LA last month, and that was a great experience. Again, I got to meet a whole bunch of people behind the scenes at SWAN. Awesome group of people. They let me help out. I felt great about helping. It's like my little way of giving back to the community, there to answer questions, help people, figure out what's going on at the venue or whatever. And I just love being around Bitcoin and Bitcoiners. It's literally the rest of my life. This is going to be like a major part of it. It's kind of funny to think, because we're in a renaissance where a new money has come onto the planet, a new, better way to transact between humans. And we're watching the adoption of it in real time. And that's something that almost no one's ever actually lived through. The adoption of gold took thousands of years, really, for it to spread over the whole planet. Bitcoin's getting adopted over the whole planet in 14 years so far. Like, it's all over the whole planet already. And it's really fascinating to think about, because there's an ecosystem. There is educational courses. There are podcasts like this one that are about money. There are no podcasts about the British pound or the Japanese yen that thousands of people tune into to learn about. It's kind of funny, because there's going to be a day when people are going to go like, they had podcasts to teach people about the money we use every day. Like, kids are going to laugh and think, why did they spend all that time? Because we were in a world where too many people were asleep and couldn't see the broken money they were forced to use. We're forced to use it, but at the barrel of a gun, essentially. Right. So it's funny, because we spend all this time. I want the world to wake up. I want full adoption. I want everybody to have a better world because of this thing called Bitcoin. And one day, all my efforts will be like, yeah, hopefully they weren't wasted because it led to the adoption. But one day it'll be almost like a joke that why did we even need to do this? It's so obvious to somebody in the future. It'll be like obvious. It's a weird concept. I think of some strange stuff once in a while, but here we are promoting the future money of the world that people are going to laugh and think, why did they even have to? But we have to. The rest of the world is stupid and asleep. We got to wake them all up and get to figure this stuff out. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, thank you very much for being on the show.
Sure.
Love to have you back on the show. So much more
Yeah, man.
topics that we touched on that we could have dived deeper into. Next time, I
Yeah,
hope
man.
we get a chance to get to those. Thank you, everybody, for watching the Wisdom Through Bitcoin podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, send it out to all your friends, and help us get the word out about Bitcoin from one of Bitcoin's best ambassadors, Surfer Jim.
Thanks, dude.